Hello, I'm Dr. Angie McCartney.
And I'm Ruth McCartney.
Welcome to TeaFlix,
where each episode's intimate conversation features a fascinating guest across the spectrum of Beatles world, pop culture, Grammy winners, the music industry, chefs, producers, music stars, actors, and more. So bottoms up and join us as they spill the tea on TeaFlix. It is showtime. It says we're live again.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Happy Tuesday.
Oh, thank you.
Happy Tuesday, everyone. Good to see everyone. So, Madam is back after pulling a muscle in her back.
Oh, I know. I don't know what I did, but oh boy, I just couldn't sit up or...
Should have fight with the scanner.
Get my underwear on without falling over.
Oh, let's not start talking about your knickers this early in the show.
Oh, I don't know. It's exciting.
We have a nice British gentleman on here.
Oh, excuse me.
Behave yourself. So we are very excited to have our guest today joining us live from a posh part of Liverpool. Spencer was born and still lives near Liverpool, England, and he's an acknowledged authority on the Beatles. He's been broadcasting his weekly show On the Beat on BBC Radio Merseyside for 35 years, and over that time has conducted more interviews about the band, all captured on tape, than anyone in the whole wide world.
The world.
That gills my world.
I know.
So Spencer Leigh saw Bob Dylan at the Liverpool Odeon in 1965, and it changed his life. He couldn't believe a concert could be so magical. The next year, he saw him in Liverpool with the band, and it was even better. Spencer tells the remarkable stories of these concerts in one of his many fascinating books, and there are 30 of them, folks. That book is called Bob Dylan, Outlaw Blues, and that's a comprehensive biography of Bob Dylan, and Spencer has also spoken to over 300 musicians for the book. He's written over 30 books, as I mentioned, including biographies of Lonnie Donegan, Billy Fury, Buddy Holly, the Merseybeat Jazz Band, Elvis Presley, Simon and Garfunkel, and Angie's favorite, Frank Sinatra. So he is an honored friend at our kids' Liverpool Institute of Performing Arts, known as LIPA, and he has a gold badge of merit from the British Academy of Composers and Songwriters. His latest memoir, here we go, here it is, called 80 at 80, and you won't believe this young man is 80 when you meet him, is full of anecdotes and stories from his decades spent on BBC Radio Merseyside and column writing for the Liverpool Echo. It features hundreds of household names he's interviewed, ranging from local legend Ken Dodd, there's Mrs., and movie stars like Billy Bob Thornton. So Billy Bob, if you're watching, we're still trying to get you on. But it's the tales of the Beatles and the fascinating singers-songwriters and the rest of music's movers and shakers that dominate his action-packed biography. Whether he's talking to Willie Nelson or Wee Willie Harris, Spencer Leigh has an unerring ability to recall the small, fascinating details of the conversations he's been privileged to have with decades of artists who've shaped popular music history. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Spencer Leigh, welcome.
Thanks for the introduction. Best introduction I've ever had. Thank you.
Well, and now we've got it on tape, haven't we?
Yeah.
That's good. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you. Yes, I mean it's quite a nice day in Southport. I live very close to the Pine Woods, so I go out there. So it's really good.
That's great. Nice. Well, first of all, I don't want to dwell on it because it's sad, but we would both like to extend our condolences to Liverpool and the Liverpool area for that tragic incident that happened at the end of the premiere. So sending all our love across the miles to you lot.
Well, that's nice to know. The event travelled across the world then.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank God nobody died, but oh dear. You know, it's tragic when
they could have done. You know, it's tragic. Absolutely.
But anyway, all's hopefully well that ends well when everybody gets out. And thanks to Alder Hey again. That was the hospital that saved my life in 1964 when I had my kidney removed at Alder Hey. So everybody in the hospital system and the first responders do yeoman's work. Liverpool is a fantastic place for that. So let's get on to your incredible career, not just as a broadcaster, but also composer and author and interviewer.
Yeah, you've interviewed over 2,000 artists, I believe, on the beat. On the beat.
Yes.
The one interview truly surprised you.
And I was in your part of the world only a few days ago because I was in Hoylake.
Oh.
Yeah, yes. And I was having tea with John Gorman. And John had a heart attack, and I was ringing him up for some information for a piece I was doing, and he said, "Oh, come out and see me." And he invited me to a place called the Quirky Cafe in Hoylake.
Perfect place for John Gorman.
It was a wonderful place to go in because people were doing stuff all over the place. Kids were messing about. Someone was playing an organ or piano in the center of the room. John was in the corner, And in fact, his first words to me were, he said, "I've had a stroke, but that's a ridiculous name for it, isn't it? Because if someone gives you a stroke, you want to say that's nice."
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
I said, "You haven't lost your sense of humor, John."
No, never. Not John. Yeah.
When I got off the train, because do orchestral maneuvers in the dark mean anything in America?
Oh, yes. Julia, my childhood friend, Julia Neal, knows Andy very well.
Yeah, well, in fact, they didn't have a phone. Andy didn't have a phone as he was growing up, and they used the phone box by the station. And people don't use phone boxes now, but they've kept the phone box and they put an OMD logo on it and put a little plaque on it saying, this was used by OMD. So isn't that fantastic?
Yeah, I went to.
That's really quirky.
I went to West Kirby Grammar School. One of my best friends sometimes tunes into the show, Julia Neal, and she and Andy McCluskey were very close and wrote, in fact, a couple of songs together. And 50 years later, she still gets little tiny royalty checks because she's got some OMD tracks that she wrote.
Oh.
So, yeah.
I mean, they're great, the OMD stuff. And Andy also wrote Whole Again, which was a #1 for Atomic Kitten. And that sounds just like a Shirelles record from the 1962. And you could imagine the Beatles hearing that and saying, "Oh, wouldn't mind recording that."
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So your first book was about Paul Simons. Before we get to the other Paul, the obvious one, the elephant in the room. Your first book was about Paul Simon. That was back in 1973. What drew you to him in particular? And what did that early writing experience teach you about music biographies?
Well, I started working in insurance when I was 18 and had a whole career in insurance, and I was doing until, as it were, my early retirement. I was doing all the writing and everything and book writing as a kind of hobby. Yeah. And I was taking the actuarial exams, I remember, and in 1973, when they'd finished, I thought the summer's coming. I've been studying all through the winter. I thought I'll write a book. And I found a Liverpool publisher who was starting up, and they wanted to publish it. So we did a book on Simon and Garfunkel, which, looking at it now, I think, oh gosh, I didn't interview. I only interviewed a couple of people for the book. I didn't go out of my way to interview people. It's mostly a sort of paste and scissors job, and I'm a bit embarrassed by it now. But I did do about 10 years ago a book on Simon and Garfunkel, which was much better than my initial effort, and I felt vindicated a little bit when I did that.
So, but you've interviewed so many people, and you've been described as a walking encyclopedia of pop and rock culture. How do you organize and retain that information? And I guess when you are writing new books about new people, you can go back and refer to those notes or those memories or those tapes, right? You can regurgitate some of it in a different format.
Oh, yes, most of my interviews I've transcribed. You can see my books behind me there, and there's a filing cabinet that's absolutely full of transcribed interviews. And I've got those on the computer too, so I can mess around with those in any way. So it's no particular problem. Once I've interviewed someone, I think, well, I can use that interview all over the place. And indeed, that's what's happened over the years. So I suppose the older I get and the more people I interview, the bigger my net, as it were. But it's great fun having those interviews, and they're very useful. Sometimes I think, oh gosh, when I'm working on a book, I think, oh gosh, why didn't I ask so and so about so and so? But these things happen. Yeah. But I'm glad to have all these interviews, and I've been thinking recently that when I shuffle off, I don't want all this stuff to go to a skip. So I'm giving a lot of my archive to Liverpool Central Library.
Great.
I've been making up files of press cuttings and things I've had over the years. Yeah. For example, my Searchers Press Cuttings file has got about, I would say, 400 or 500 pieces in it about the Searchers.
Wow.
And I've got 20 files like that about the Beatles. And so I think that the library will find them very, very useful indeed. I think people will like them. Because in the 1960s, when the Beatles came up, Liverpool Library always very interested in what's happening around them, of course.
Yeah.
But the librarian at the time thought the group that's going to really make it from Liverpool are the Spinners, with a focus on the Spinners. And they collected masses of stuff about the Spinners and very little about the Beatles. Now, nothing wrong with collecting stuff about the Spinners because they're very important to the UK. But, I mean, that was a wrong decision and they should, of course, have chased the Beatles, but they didn't realise that at the time. So, I mean, I've got all this stuff from the Beatles, all these cuttings and everything, and they've given me so much pleasure over the years. And I hope that they're going to give the public pleasure.
Oh,
that's very sweet. Elizabeth's just saying, what a lovely thing to do. I agree.
Yeah.
Because, you know, what's interesting to you is certainly you're not the only person in the world who's going to find that fascinating, right? And kids growing up these days, especially all the international visitors that Liverpool has during Beatle Week and throughout the year, if they know that the library is a place where they can go get a library card or, you know, make a donation or whatever to keep it supported, that the Spencer Leigh archive is there. I think that's something.
Well, they are going to call it the Spencer Leigh collection, in fact, which does sound a bit boastful, but it's stuff I've accumulated over all the years, and I've got files on bands that hardly made it at all. You know, the Dennisons and people like that. So all that will be useful to people, I think, it means that they can come to the library and get that information. So if it helps other authors too, that's great.
Oh, it will, I'm sure. Now, what was that? Oh, I know. In The Road to Love Me Do, you explore the scene before the Beatles. Now, what do people tend to overlook or misunderstand about Merseyside's roots?
Or Merseybeat's roots as
or
well.
Merseybeat roots, I should say.
Well, I think that it was such a collective effort. If you say take Buddy Holly in Lubbock, he pretty well grew up on his own. There was very little music around him, but he heard the American records coming out, the American rock and roll coming out, worked out how to do them, formed his own group, and then eventually, of course, became a national star. Yeah. But there weren't a lot of other groups around him in Lubbock who were doing the same thing. He was unusual. Yeah. Quite different for the Beatles who were growing up because there was so much happening. And the interesting thing about Liverpool, I suppose, is that Liverpool isn't like one big thing. It was different, people in different parts of Liverpool were doing different things. And that in sort of 1960 or so, there weren't beat clubs in the centre of Liverpool. Right. The Cavern was doing jazz music at the time. Right. And so you had groups coming into the south, in the south of Liverpool, who lived there, like Kings. In the south of Liverpool, that's really, you're getting into the Beatles area there, the Quarrymen coming along, and there were bands there. Then you had bands in the Wirral who were starting up. In Crosby, where I lived, which is north of Liverpool, you had bands like King Size Taylor and the Dominoes, and they were playing St. Luke's Church Hall, for example. And they didn't go into Liverpool. Ian and the Zodiacs, who came from Crosby, said the biggest decision that they made in their life was when they were offered a gig in Liverpool, and should they take it or not? And that was because and that's only 7 miles, but that's the way it was then. And I do think that when Brian Epstein took over the Beatles and wanted to know if they were going to have an impact outside of Liverpool, right? I do think that the first thing he thought of was, we'll conquer Southport. Because you have a look at it when Brian Epstein becomes the manager of the Beatles, within a few weeks they're playing 5 or 6 different venues in Southport. And so they do well in Southport, and then it leads on to other things. And it's all these little pockets of groups all working it out for themselves, all doing it a bit different. And my book, The Road to Love Me Do, to come back to your question, was that I wanted to show what was happening in Liverpool what people were doing and how it all coalesced once the Cavern started to do beat music, and they all came up then. And you had 2 recording studios in Liverpool. You had Percy Phillips's studio, which is famous in Kensington, which is where the Beatles recorded as the Quarrymen. And actually, only a few days before the Beatles at that studio, a young lad went in there because he wanted to do an audition for Larry Parnes, and that was Ronnie Wycherley, who became Billy Fury. In the course of a week, and Billy Fury and the Beatles in there, and didn't know it. And Billy Fury, of course, was the first big rock and roll star to come from Liverpool. And people thought, well, if he can make it, we can make it too.
Yeah,
of course. I mean, Billy Fury was charisma in bucketfuls.
Oh yeah,
he would perform on the stage, and he did a song called "Wondrous Place." Do you remember that?
I don't.
He gets to the line in the song where it goes, "Wondrous Place," and he would do it with a cigarette, and they'd have a solo spot on him, and he'd just go tap his cigarette, "Wondrous Place." Everyone would scream. And I said to his mother once, I said, when you loved going to Billy's concerts, what did you do when all these girls were screaming for Billy all around you? And she said, I was screaming too.
Oh, God, how hilarious.
Really charming. But so he showed that you could come from Liverpool and make it. There were other stars from Liverpool too, but there weren't rock and roll stars, people like Frankie Vaughan, Michael Holiday, the beautiful Lita Rosa, for example.
I loved her. Yeah,
she was great.
On the comedy side too, you had Arthur Askey and Ken Dodd and
Ted Ray,
and a ton of them. Pete Price, just too many to mention. But you know, where were the Foremost from? We were very friendly with the late great Billy Hatton. What part of Liverpool were the Foremost from?
Billy Hatton actually grew up with Billy Fury. They were friends together, and they both encouraged each other. And Billy Hatton had a great sense of humor.
Oh yeah.
They had a group called the Foremost where they did impressions of other people. They were very, very entertaining indeed. But they.
Billy used to sing "With These Hands" with a pair of artificial arms.
Yes, so they go like yes.
His arms would get
about 10 foot long.
Yeah.
Freddie Starr used to do that too.
Yeah, I think Freddie Starr had maracas in his fake hands. They used to just get longer and longer.
Yeah.
But the time, Freddie Starr lived in Heswell near us, and he came round to Rembrandt one night, and we had a bay window with big red velvet floor-to-ceiling curtains. And I think our Billy had a few, probably at the Devon Doorway or the Victoria on the way over. And he came to see Uncle Jim, my dad. And he decided that he was going to do a Marlene Dietrich cabaret for all of us in the lounge. And so it was raining. He'd come over in a pair of wellies. So he went behind the curtains, took his trousers off. He just had his little Y-fronts and his wellies on. And this leg comes around the curtain and he starts singing, "Falling in love again." He was Billy.
He was very erratic, Freddie Starr. I mean, I always thought when you saw him, you could see why he should make it and also why he couldn't make it in many ways. The people turned. I mean, for example, Ray McFall, who was quite a strict person who ran the Cavern, had Freddie Starr there one night, and it was a night that Jim Reeves had died. His death had come over the news. And Freddie Starr just lay on the stage and said, "My impression of Jim Reeves." And Ray McFall said, "You're not appearing in this club again." And he told Bob Wooler that, and Bob Wooler couldn't book him there anymore. And that's sort of typical of Freddie Starr. He was always doing things like that.
Yeah,
he was uncontrollable, really.
I think the lift didn't go all the way to the top floor with Freddie sometimes.
No, it didn't. That's a good way of describing it. Yes.
He always reminded me of Keith Moon, the crazy drummer. would just break out, could be the nicest, tenderest guy in the world and can suddenly be a lunatic.
Next thing, he's ripping the sink off the wall.
Yes.
Absolutely crazy. So speaking of all these musicians, you've written sleeve notes for more than 300 albums.
Oh my goodness.
Because you are an archivist and have an incredible memory and the collection that you have, that's got to be really different storytelling to get that condensed down. How on earth do you approach condensing something to fit on the back of an album when there's so much to talk about?
You have to, when you're commissioned to do a sleeve note, you have to do it so many words, and that's it, you see. So I'm conditioned to sort of giving people the number of words they want. And if it's a CD sleeve and you've only got one page, you're only going to get 400 or 500 words on that. And also, it's not annoying, but one of the things you have to do about a CD sleeve note and an LP sleeve note too, of course, is you have to be positive all the time. You're there to sell the record, as it were. Yes. So you're not going to have anything nasty about people at all in there. But it's quite a good discipline. It's quite good fun. I mean, because there was a TV series in England in the 1980s, top TV series called Heartbeat. Do you remember that?
No, we left England in 82, 83. So yeah.
Well, this was a series that was set in Yorkshire in the 60s, and they had a 60s soundtrack. And they asked me if I would write the sleeve notes for the Best of Heartbeat, which was 2 CDs of top 20 hits from the 60s.
Great.
And I did the sleeve notes for that, and it went to #1 in the album charts. Now, not a single person bought the album for my sleeve notes, of course, but I always like to think that I've got a #1 record.
Absolutely.
That's right. And it was called Heartbeat. I'll have to look for that.
Yeah, it was a TV series. It was a good TV series of its time, certainly. And they got all great songs and they paid top rates to get them on that show too, to have those old records played. So some of the old performers did pretty well out of that show.
That's great. Well, my cousin Kate Robbins still does well from Surprise, Surprise. She wrote for Cilla Black. So, I think
it's one of her key songs, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think TV is one of the last bastions of they understand royalties and they pay. Now we're in this horrible age of streaming where artists get 0.0003 cents per stream. How are you ever going to make a living and give up your day job if you're a young artist today? It's really kind of sad, but it's great that the TV series will come along and pay good licensing money for something like that. That's paying respect, though, isn't it? Yeah,
and there's a nice statue of Cilla Black now by the Cavern.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, people go up to it and they always want to snog Cilla. So you always as you walk past, you see people taking pictures of them kissing the statue and the like.
That's funny. Our friend Elizabeth from Philly, she's asking, did you ever meet or interview Peter Sellers?
No, I didn't. I mean, I'd like to have done, but the trouble with Peter Sellers, I think, is you'd never know what Peter Sellers you were going to meet, because he was such a such a unique character. He had so many personalities.
Yeah, right.
And that group, the Goons. I did meet Spike Milligan, who was part of that, and Harry Seacombe. Come to think of it, in fact, I did a sleeve note for Harry Seacombe, but the Goons were just so off the wall, really.
Yeah.
And 3 very eccentric people all together.
Yeah.
And it could be very funny. Spike Milligan, I absolutely love seeing on stage. I went to see him when he was at the Royal Court in Liverpool. I deliberately went to see him 3 times in 1 week because I wanted to see how much of it was spontaneous.
Yes.
Right.
And it was amazing, the stuff that he did. I remember him coming on one night with a copy of the Liverpool Echo and holding it up, and there was a big hole in it. And he looked through the paper at the audience and he said, "Not much in the paper today. Put it down." I mean, that's a fantastic joke. And he just did that on one night, He just got so much material.
I loved him. I thought he was wonderful, yeah.
Yeah, he was incredible. The Goons were King Charles's favorite growing up when he was Prince Charles, Prince of Wales.
Yes.
He absolutely idolized the Goons, didn't he?
Yeah, and I love the way Spike Milligan did his memoirs. You know, what did he call it? It's about got Hitler in the title. But he did several books of his memories of the war, and they were really very, very good indeed, and very funny. Lots of humour in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if it wasn't for places like the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, the Goons and Scaffold and Peter Cook and Dudley Moore and things, you know, those kind of acts wouldn't really have had the recognition. Have you ever been to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival?
I have, yes, and we saw a few good things there, but not for long. I saw Peter Straker doing a Jack Brel show, which was great. But that's one of the good things about Liverpool, I think. Liverpool 8 was such a creative hub.
Yeah.
And you had the artists and the painters and the singers, the musicians all together living around there, and they sort of fed off each other. It's almost like it was in France with the poets and the singers there. And I'm sure it's had a great effect on the music as such. And you do have groups like Liverpool Scene, for example, who had a mixture of poetry and music.
Yeah.
Right.
And there was a singer-songwriter from Liverpool I was very keen on called Mike Hart.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you remember him?
He was in Paris 9, wasn't he?
No, that was somebody else. Hart. That was
Another Mike Hart?
Different Mike Hart.
Different Mike Hart, I think. He was in the late 60s, and he did songs like Almost Liverpool 8. And he wrote about his own environment. He was like a Liverpool Bob Dylan. And I love seeing him, but he was tremendously erratic in performance. He could be very good, or he could just be terrible. And you've got to be consistent, really.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And she worked at the Royal Court box office, didn't you?
I did. Yeah.
What was your favorite thing that people used to stick their head in the window and say,
"Have you got any tickets?"
Yes.
Hold on a moment. I've got bicycle chains. I've got a group run. Just a moment. And I'd lean back and say to my workmates, "I've got one."
Got a line?
Or somebody who say, "Have you got?"
The Royal Court is doing absolutely great now.
It is.
Because it puts on a lot of local comedies.
Yes.
So there's a lot of new shows that are going on there. We just bought tickets for the Scouse Christmas Carol. So we know that that's going to be a great fun show at Christmas.
Oh,
so
awesome.
it's good that it's doing well. I mean, a lot of people go to shows in Liverpool, and that's great. In fact, we got Bruce Springsteen is playing in Anfield this week. He's doing 2 gigs there. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see who'll be the guests with him, because he usually has someone up. And naturally, we're hoping there's going to be Paul McCartney, but you never know.
Well, if you send a drone up over the house in Heswell, if the lights are on, Paul's home.
Oh, right. in which case he may be going to be there.
You never know. I know he loves him, Bruce. So do we.
Yeah.
So Ange has a question about. So we're speaking of Bruce Springsteen and Macca icons.
Yeah, well, from Elvis to Sinatra to Buddy Holly, you've written about so many icons. Mm-hmm. Which artist's story do you feel is still misunderstood or underrated today?
There are lots of people that I've liked that I've always thought, why does nobody else seem to like them very much? The classic being John Stewart, who wrote Daydream Believer for the Monkees and had an American hit with Gold. But he released album after album, and yet he was only playing small clubs, both in England and America. Yeah. And I always thought that he was absolutely great on stage, because he was someone who, what he said in between the songs was as important as the songs. It was all beautifully worked out, and he was great. And I wish I'd found a publisher who would take a book on John Stewart, because I'd love to have written one about him, but it didn't actually happen. And I appreciate the publishers want to have something that they can hopefully sell.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and I'll have to go look him up, because I know all of that music I know and grew up with and absolutely love it. And again, because of not just your author career, but your broadcaster career, you've been exposed to so much music, spending decades on Radio Merseyside. How do you think the Beeb, Auntie Beeb, or in London, the institution versus the Radio Merseyside local tongue-in-cheek Scouse-ish culture. How did that shape your voice as a broadcaster and as a cultural commentator, the dichotomy of the BBC and Radio Merseyside?
Well, I was doing stuff for Radio Merseyside roughly since it started in 1967, odd book reviews and such like. And then I did some one-off shows. And then around 1978, 79, I thought, nobody is telling the story of Merseybeat. It's been forgotten. Yes. I thought I'll interview as many musicians as I can find. And I interviewed about 200 musicians, made a series, a 12-week series, 12 one-hour programs called Let's Go Down the Cavern, which is a show I suppose I'm well known for now, because it was the first time that anyone had done that. As I say, I'd interviewed far too many people for it. I know now that if you make a 12-week series of 12 one-hour programs, you don't have more than about 40 people in it, because there are too many voices coming at you and people can't identify with everyone. You've got to not go so fast. But on the other hand, I got this remarkable bank of interviews. Some people I only used for a minute or two on air, but I got a whole half hour of them talking. So I got interview after interview after interview. Wow. And I thought I can use these in all sorts of ways. And that sort of started me getting my collection, I suppose, really. And Let's Go Down the Cavern. I'm very pleased to say that now it's on the British Library's website, so people can sort of log into that and hear the whole 12-week series.
Right. That's fantastic. Now, who owns content like that? If you go out and you dig up the story and you find the person, you go and interview them. But if you're on the clock for the BBC, who actually owns the copyright of the tape?
I didn't think I was going to be saying this publicly, but I will.
Oh, you don't have to answer it.
No. I did say to the BBC, and I was quite shrewd, come to think of it. I said that they were only going to pay me the amount I would do if I was just presenting a show. And I said, well, if I do all these interviews are my material. And they said, yes, that's fine. And Good. So ever since then, they've been my material, and that's it. So that's great. But I wasn't really going to say that publicly. Well, it's quite useful, actually, because there's no problem. I've got it in writing, and that's that.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but for any young broadcasters or interviewers or podcasters that are listening, it shouldn't just be assumed that it is the interviewer's material if you're on somebody else's payroll. So you do need to set something up in writing ahead of time so that everybody...
Well, I was never on the BBC's payroll. I was just being paid so much to do a show, you see. It wasn't like I was working for them. I was just doing that show. And so therefore, although they gave me the tape to do the interviews, I was able to have them as my property. And that was great. I mean, no one who was working full-time for the BBC would have been allowed to do the number of interviews that I did.
Right. No, there was a dispute with the record label years ago about an artist who wasn't on payroll, had written, the album deal was for 11 songs, and she had written 35 and turned them in, and they kept saying, they accepted 10, and they kept saying, no, don't like the 11th one, write another one, write another. And this went on for 2.5 years. And in the end, a clever lawyer advised that all she had to do to turn in the album was give the record label back 5 boxes of empty 2-inch BASF tape, because they'd supplied her with empty tape. They hadn't paid her for the content on the tape she'd recorded. So she kept the recorded tapes and just reimbursed them with the blanks they'd given her, and she got away with it.
Well, after he'd done Brown Eyed Girl, Van Morrison wanted to change labels. Mm-hmm. And was told that he owed the label an album before he went, and he just made up 12 songs on the spot, and they were just rubbish off the top of his head to get himself out of the contract. And the label issued them as well. So it was embarrassment, I suppose, for Van Morrison, but he got out of the contract that way. So people do that, and Neil Young was criticised a few years ago because you may remember at fairgrounds they used to have recording booths where you could go in and record your voice. I mean, obviously very poor equipment and everything in the 1950s, but they were there. And Neil Young found one of these and had one and decided to make an album in it. And, I mean, the album actually, I mean, he's performing okay, but the album sounds ghastly because the sound is so bad on it. But because he's Neil Young, they put that out. And, there may be other reasons why he turned that over and said, you've got to put this out.
That's funny. I'm working on some T-shirt designs for him at the moment, so I'll have to ask his sound engineer friend, my old friend Nico, if he's ever heard that album, because Nico, he's a, Grammy nominated. He's got ears like dog ears. He's an amazing sound engineer and producer. So I'll have to ask him if Neil's ever played that record.
Yeah, well, for example, he did an Ian Tyson song on that, Four Strong Winds, and it was you could tell it was a really good version, but he'd recorded it on this terrible equipment, and he was trying to make a point about these machines as such. But it actually backfired on him because you just thought, oh, why didn't you do it properly?
Because he's Neil Young, he doesn't have to.
Exactly. That unfortunately, I suppose, is what happens from time to time.
Yeah. Martin and I were just at a studio in West Hollywood a couple of weeks ago called The Village Recording Studios, really famous place here in LA. And Neil Young showed up to support. It's a great album. Called The Songs of Neil Young Volume 1, and it is to support the Bridge School, which is he has a child is not nonverbal, and he has a couple of other children with some medical issues, and so people like Brandi Carlile and Fiona Apple and what have you have got together and done some fantastic Neil Young covers. It's on a label called Cinema Music Group, and it's distributed by Kilphonic. So Martin and I are very friendly with. In fact, the label is one of our clients. And so we were lucky enough to be standing like 2 feet away from Neil Young a couple of weeks ago, and he is a character, I'll tell you.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I saw him in Liverpool in the early 1970s, and the On the Beach album was just coming out, but people didn't know it. And he started from what I remember, I think it was a double bill with Leigh and Russell, but it was around that time at the Liverpool Empire, and he came on. And he did the first song from On the Beach, and nobody had heard it, so they clapped politely, you see. And then he does a second song from On the Beach, and he went through the whole album. And he gets his applause, and then he takes his bow as though he's finished. And people are still applauding, but they're wondering what's going on because they haven't heard After the Gold Rush or anything like that.
Right. Yeah.
And then he comes back on stage, and he says, and here's something you've heard before. And the whole place erupted. They were going to hear After the Gold Rush or something. And what he did was the first song from On the Beach again.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. I mean, this is, you could see how the boredom of performing or something, it was getting to him in some way.
Yeah.
And this was a reaction to it. And it's interesting the way that people get around things. But he certainly shouldn't have done that because that was being insulting to the audience, really, who paid money.
It's pretty funny though, and now they know. On the beach, they'll be able to brag and say, "I was there the first night he played this in its entirety." You see?
Oh yes, indeed. But they weren't too happy at the time, certainly.
No, I bet. Getting onto a bit more of a maudlin subject because shit happens in life.
Yeah, well, having written obituaries for The Guardian and The Independent. How do you approach celebrating someone's life in just a few hundred words?
Well, yeah, it can be 900 words. It can be 1,000. It depends who it is. But you're given a number of words to do. Normally, they're people who've had quite long careers, so it's not particularly difficult. But you put the events of their life. You have to have a defining event at the start of it. One story that gets readers into it who wouldn't be interested in that subject normally, but they're sucked into it by the first story. So you've got to have one event that determines their life, as it were. So once you've decided what that is, after about 250 words, you can then say, so-and-so was born in so-and-so, and off you go and tell his story. The difficult part of doing the obituaries, I find, is getting the personal stuff, finding out how many times they've been married, how many children they've gotten, because that often isn't public knowledge. And so there are some problems there. But on the whole, I mean, I greatly enjoy writing obituaries, and sometimes they're done in advance.
Of course, well, the inevitable, right? I mean, it's just don't need to do it.
In fact, Hunter Davies told me that he actually wrote obituaries for the 4 individual Beatles in 1967 because the Times wanted them on file.
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. Oh, Hunter Davies was a character.
He's written
He still is.
Yeah.
He's still when I knew him. Do you remember one time he came to stay at Rembrandt?
Yeah.
And we put Mike McGeer, my other brother.
Yeah.
We made an apple pie bed for Hunter, so when he got in, he couldn't get his feet in.
Yes, I know what you mean. Yeah.
And
we tied bells underneath.
McGeer, I think Paul had just come back from Rishikesh, from India, and they had all of these little Indian bell necklace things, whatever.
So we
and
tied them
I remember Mike crawling under the guest bed and tying all of these bells underneath the mattress, the box mattress and the metal. And I was handing the bells to Mike. I must have been about 7 or 8 years old. And I'm handing the bells to Mike and saying, what's going on? He said, oh, your Uncle Hunter's coming to spend the weekend. This will keep him awake all night.
Yeah, but he get a column out of it. He doesn't mind what happens to him because he writes about everything.
Oh, absolutely. No, absolutely.
He's a lovely character. And he's got his girlfriend lives in the Isle of Wight and has a boat, and they both go off on this boat now. So at the age of 87, he's on the ocean waves.
He's still rocking. I know. He's wonderful.
If you talk to him, Spencer, we'd love to have him on for a chat and a cup of tea. If he's into it, do put him in touch. I'd love to.
But he's a lovely guy, Hunter.
Yes, he's wonderful.
Has written so many books over the years. He's interested in everything. I mean, if you watching out there meet Hunter Davies, he is likely to say to you as a first question, have you paid off your mortgage or something like that? You don't know what's going to happen. And you don't know what he does with this information, but he just collects it. Yeah. And I think he's a remarkable character. I like him very, very much indeed. Very, very friendly guy. And
funny.
Very, very generous, I think too. With his time with other people and encouraging people, and in fact, when he was writing the Beatles book in 1967-68, he did say to them, "I want samples of your handwriting." And Paul McCartney wrote out "Yesterday," which Hunter had got. And Hunter kept these bits of paper, of course. And then about 15 years ago now,
right.
Hunter gave some stuff to the British Library, and he said, you can have this. This is Paul McCartney writing out his lyric of "Yesterday." And they put it next to the Magna Carta. I mean, it couldn't be better displayed. Oh! Beautiful.
Wow.
And it's still there now. But I know that Paul wasn't very happy about that because he said to Hunter, it's not yours to give away. And that's an interesting point, really.
Well, I'll tell you a story. Do you want to know the very first person to actually write down the lyrics to "Yesterday," but in Pitman's shorthand?
Oh, really?
His father from a phone box in London said, I've finished scrambled eggs. So, he said, I'll drive up. I'll be there in a couple of hours.
No, he was on the train. He was at Euston Station.
I've tried it in a phone box. He said, I'll come on up. I'll see you in an hour or two. So Jim said, well, Ange, pick up the bedroom phone. It's Paul. And he said, Paul, if you want to give the words to Angie, she can write them down.
So you don't forget them.
So as I gave me them, I wrote them in Pitman's shorthand.
Right.
And then when he arrived home, he said, oh, where's the lyrics? And I tore out of my shorthand notebook this piece of paper and gave it to him, and it was full of squiggles.
Was this the scrambled egg version or the "Yesterday" version?
Yesterday, the final version when he
great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you, some years ago, I was interviewing Willie Nelson, which was great because he had the biggest spliff you've ever seen in front of him. And I like to say to people, because you get a different answer to this question all the time, what's your favorite Beatles song? Because there's so many choices. And Willie said, Yesterday. And I said, just to be devil's advocate, I said, but is it a great song? You don't find out what happened yesterday. And Willie said, that's what makes it a great song. And I thought Willie has just given me a masterclass in songwriting there.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Good.
That's a
grief.
beauty.
Another lovely guy, isn't he?
What's
And
your,
in fact, when I was at Lipper once, I'm sorry to be name dropping, but when I was at Lipper once, I had my 30 seconds with Paul McCartney as he was working the room, and I thought I'd tell him this story about Willie Nelson. And he said, thank you very much. He said, Willie's a great writer, so I'm glad to hear that from him.
That's
So that was
great.
nice.
What's your favorite Beatles song, Spencer?
But it changes from time to time. I mean, there's so many that I've just had a memory about yesterday too, because when I saw Spike Milligan on stage, he started singing Yesterday, and his version was yesterday someone came and took the stove away.
That's nice.
So many variations, but I love Yesterday. I mean, the great thing about the Beatles is when I ask people what their favorite Beatles song is, the answer is always going to be different. And my answer differs from day to day, really. Something I think is just a remarkable love song. But I do think something in the way she woos me sounds a bit old-fashioned. Now, maybe George wanted to sound old-fashioned when he did that, but it sounded a bit wrong at the time. And I don't know. Could he have improved that? I don't know. But it's a remarkable song, certainly. A great song.
Yeah,
I tell you what,
yours
just-
is Long and Winding Road, isn't it?
Yeah, well, some days, but yesterday I thought about because the world is round.
Yeah.
It turns me on, yeah.
Lovely harmonies in that.
My favorite song is In My Life, because if you ask somebody to close their eyes and make their own music video in their mind's eye, in their head, there are places I remember. My places are going to be different from your places, are going to be different from hers, from everybody else's. It's such a brilliant concept that lets the listener have control of the visuals.
Yes, I mean, the idea for the song comes from a Charles Lamb poem. It's in Palgrave's National Treasury, and I always wonder if Aunt Mimi had that in her books. It's a sort of poetry book the middle-aged ladies in the 1960s would have bought, I think, and had in the house. Yeah. And John might have picked it up, seen this poem by Charles Lamb, and then done his version of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, the inspiration came from all over. God knows our regular viewers know the Golden Slumbers story, which, I was learning piano because Andrew was a piano teacher. I was forced to go to, and my dad was a great piano player. I had Jim Mack's band in the 20s. And I was forced to...
My uncle used to play in it from time to time.
No way.
Really?
Your uncle was in my dad's band?
Well, if someone was missing, they were friends. And he did odd gigs.
What instrument did he play?
He played the drums.
Oh my goodness! Is he on that famous 1920s photo, Jim Mack's band? Do you know?
No. He was just someone who knew him, and from time to time at gigs, people weren't there, and they substituted in each other's bands. That's the way it went.
That's amazing.
He didn't make anything of it, but he'd done it anyway. He certainly knew him and played with his band.
That's
anyway.
Wild.
You were saying about Uncle.
Yeah, so I was forced to learn piano, and one of the things I was given was this, 14th, 15th century piece by Thomas Dekker called Golden Slumbers, and I was murdering it. And Paul was staying for the weekend, came down Sunday morning, and he's like, "What are you strangling?" We sat in the piano stool together, and he didn't read music, and I was trying to learn, and we picked the bones out of it. And he said, "God," he picked up the music. He said, "That's gorgeous. What's it called?" I said, "Golden Slumbers." He said, "What?" I said, "Oh, it was written 500 years ago by this poet called Thomas Dekker." And he said, "That's fantastic news," or, I'm paraphrasing. And I said, well, you know, why? I'm like 7 years old. And I said,
Yeah.
why? He said, well, I might be able to use this on the next record because it's out of copyright. It's in the public domain.
Yeah. Yes, it's amazing how these things come about. Fantastic stories. I mean, that's why it's so great writing about the Beatles, because there are so many stories and so many great ones.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So obviously there wouldn't be a Beatles without Liverpool. Liverpool clearly still plays a central role in your work, your backbone, your brand. What is it, do you think, about the region, not just the city, but the region that continues to inspire and inform your storytelling?
Oh, it's there's just so much happening in the city. It's such a great place. I mean, I love London, I love Manchester, there's so many, and I love York. But there's so many places that I love. But it is just great around here. I love the people, I love the ambience and the like. And I tell you, the other day, we had a party, a street party, with about 20 people to celebrate victory in Europe. Celebrate Victory in Europe Day.
Yeah.
Yes, and there is a German gentleman who lives close to us, in his 90s now, and it was said, should we invite him to this? You see, and and we said yes, we will. You know, if he doesn't want to come, we understand, but that's fine.
But don't mention the war.
I've known him on and off, you know, for years. And it turned out that when I was chatting to him, that he had gone out with a German Schlager singer called Connie. And in 1960, he had gone he was in Hamburg, because they recorded in Hamburg, and he had gone down the Grosse Freiheit, and he had seen the Beatles with Pete Best.
Oh, good.
So I said, you have actually seen the Beatles with Pete Best before anyone in Liverpool saw them with Pete Best.
Yeah, no kidding.
So 10 years or so ago, I was writing a book called The Beatles in Hamburg. And I went over to Hamburg and researched that and wrote the book. And I didn't know this guy was living a few doors away, who'd seen the Beatles in Hamburg and had this extraordinary story. So that was lovely. So, but it just shows you it's on your doorstep. If you look, stuff is there.
Amazing.
Just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I love
also for writing, you have to have a love of other people, don't you?
Yes.
And that sort of comes over, and I love meeting people. I love meeting new people. I love talking to you today. And so that's why I found writing my memoir now, 80 by 80, was such fun, because I was reliving so many things. And also when I did it, I found that when I was writing biographies, I was trying to get inside somebody's head. What was Paul Simon thinking of when he did this? What was Frank Sinatra thinking of when he did that, and everything? And it's pretty difficult. But with me, I was writing about events in my life, and I thought, I know what I was thinking at every stage along the way. So it took a lot of, I could write it much faster than I could if I was writing a biography of somebody else, because I wasn't having to go through that thought process. And it was great. It was great fun to do as well.
Yeah. Now, finally, if you could go back and re-interview, one artist with today's perspective, who would it be, and what would you ask them?
I don't know. I mean, I'd love to interview Paul McCartney again, of course, because he's got so much to talk about. And I think there are several items and stories and things that you'd really like to get to the bottom of it. There are many stories where he just gives the pat answer that he's got worked out over the years to things. So you really get the full Hamburg story from him, or something like that. That would be really interesting, I think. And also, there are many people that I've interviewed over the years that I thought, I'd like to interview them again. I'd love to have interviewed someone like Frank Sinatra, of course, who I never got to interview. Right. And I know when I was writing that book, I thought I've got to find out about his mafia connections. Now, what I'm telling you now is actually true, believe it or not. I thought I've got to try and find someone from the mafia who knew Frank Sinatra and get some stories. And so I was asking around, trying to find contacts and things, and actually found someone who said, I'm coming on a cruise in a few weeks' time and I'll be in Liverpool.
Oh,
It's on your doorstep.
again.
Yeah, so not only did I meet a member of the Mafia, but he was actually on the doorstep too.
Good
And
grief.
he said people who don't know tough people think that Frank Sinatra was like a member of the mob, a big tough guy and everything. I tell you, he was a little punk kid really compared to us, you know. So I thought that puts Sinatra into perspective there.
But I think especially in America, what Sinatra's legacy is and has become is that he saw no color. He fought racism with every bone in his body. He, he brought Sammy Davis along and many other African-American artists, as did the Beatles. They refused to perform to a segregated audience.
You go to South Africa.
Right. Yeah. And so I think Frank Sinatra nowadays, by the younger generation who've discovered him, is remembered for somebody who brought along fellow artists, no matter what creed, what orientation, what color, whatever, that he just didn't care. He was all about all boats rise on the same tide,
Yes. Yeah, and he did an awful lot for Sammy Davis Jr., certainly.
Oh,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I mean, that was a good story to tell, Frank Sinatra's. But of course, there were a lot of people who he worked with that he treated very badly indeed.
Yeah.
So he was a mercurial character, really.
Yeah, no. Well, and I think when you're at that level and there's so many sycophants around you and so much pressure, it must be really hard to just stay with your feet on the ground.
Yes.
I totally get it,
Yes, well, he was getting it every day of his life, wasn't he?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Our friend Paul Moody's saying he had a side to him. He absolutely did. But to succeed, you kind of have to have a side to you.
Yeah.
I guess.
I love the story that when Bobby Darin was about 23 or 4, and he'd had his first hits, and he was in Las Vegas, and he was saying that I'm going to be the next Sinatra. That's what Darin was saying. He was quite big-headed right from the start.
Good luck.
And Bobby Darin and Paul Anka were sitting together at a table in Las Vegas, and Sinatra came up and said to Darin, he said, "You may think you're the next Sinatra, but I tell you one thing, kid, I'd never sing Splish Splash."
That's classic.
Wonderful, putting him right in his place. Yeah, fantastic story.
Absolutely classic. Well, scrolling across the bottom here, I've told everyone to go to either Amazon.com, Amazon.co.uk. If you're watching from Japan.co.jp. This wonderful guest of ours today, Mr. Spencer Leigh, has graced us with his time, and there are 30 books full of these kind of stories. So if you're a music or history buff of any stripe, please go find Spencer's books. And he's just a fabulous human. It's been such a great hour to spend with you. We're very lucky.
We've had a good time. I've loved meeting you. So that's been great.
We have too. And to find out your uncle was in my dad's band is unbelievable.
His name was Noel War. Yes.
Noel
War, Waugh. That was his name.
Oh, like Evelyn.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Great. Okay.
Well, everybody who is our regular viewer will know that Angie is the Limerick lady. She one of her books is Mrs. McCartney's Liverpool Limericks and Other Random Irish Haikus. And she has written you a special thank you limerick today. So if you're sitting comfortably, we will begin.
Yeah, great.
Jolly good. And a 1, 2, 3. Of pop music's past, he's the king. Spencer Leigh knows each chart topper's fling. From Merseybeat tales to rare vinyl trails, he's the bard of the Beatles and swing. Ta-da!
That's the truth, Ruth. Thank you very much. Thanks very much indeed. Lovely to talk to you both.
To talk to you, and our love to Liverpool and everybody in it. And we'll see
thank you.
all of a sudden. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to TeaFlix, and check out Dr. Angie's books, Organic Teas and CBD, at mrsmccartneysteas.com. Toodle pip!